So as you guys know, the technology gap revolves around digital health. And digital health is a field that is characterized by several rapid trends. I read this interesting article that in 2013 was the year of consumer wearables, 2014 of big data analysis, 2015 of virtual care delivery, and 2016 was the year of payer disruption. And 2017 is rightly predicted to be the year of artificial intelligence. So today's panel will walk us through the entire lifeline of a product and will include expert perspectives from the different players in the field, right from the incubators and accelerators, moving on to the startups, pharma scouting perspectives, and so on. So the moderator for today's session is Pavel Khrimian, who's the Associate Director of Partnerships at MedImmune. Please join me in welcoming Pavel and the other panelists on stage.
All right. Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organizers and this great venue. I always wanted to go to Georgetown so I can kind of check this one off my bucket list. But wow, I'm amazed. I spent some time here yesterday morning. I thought it was a great morning. Then I said to myself last night, I was like, we have to do better. And then our keynote speakers just wowed the crowd. So now the challenge is onto us to bring it home, to pull it all together and try to kind of tell the story. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Pavel Khrimian from MedImmune, biologics arm of AstraZeneca. I believe Bahija was here a couple of days ago speaking, head of MedImmune. And my role is really part of the partner strategy team as a BD lead for diagnostic partnerships and digital health partnerships. And while we dedicate to precision medicine, most of our work has been historically done in a kind of diagnostic space. So we've talked a lot, we've heard a lot about stratifying and selecting patients. So we've created a lot of partnerships to help us move our pipeline forward. I have to say we're just starting to scratch the surface on the digital health side. And kind of doing that a bit early in our pipeline, right? So anywhere from discovery to clinical trials, more so than kind of in the later stage in commercial. So I'm honored to have my panelists here with me. And we all know that everything you just heard today, no one institution, no one entity can do it alone. You essentially need an army to get it done, and you need diverse backgrounds to get it done. So what we have today here in the panel is that diverse background to kind of give you a different perspective. So I will stop here. The goal is for me to do less talking, for them to talk more, and we're going to have fun. So I'm just going to be quiet and move to Julia to introduce herself. And when you do introduce yourself, give us your role, your organization, what is it that you guys are focused on, and then once we complete, we'll kind of kick off with our discussion.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for having me. My name is Julia Belaya. I run the corporate partnerships for healthcare for Plug and Play Tech Center. We're the largest global technology accelerator. We launched back in 2006, and we run industry-specific corporate matchmaking programs across 9 different themed areas, healthcare being one of those, but we have everything from brand and retail to supply chain and logistics, new materials and packaging. I joined Plug and Play back in October 2015 when we launched the healthcare focus. And we run a consortium model of open innovation where we'll partner with basically all the players under one industry umbrella to figure out what are the innovation gaps in the industry and then source emerging companies, startups to matchmake with these corporations to hopefully get some pilots, proof of concepts, validations, and help bring them to market. So for healthcare, we work with providers, payers, consumer health, med tech. So some of our partners are some of the sponsors of this. So we work with Amgen, Takeda, Boehringer Ingelheim, Pfizer, and they basically dictate the kind of technologies that we look at and then invest in. So we're early stage investors looking for capital efficient companies. So that's definitely more on the digital health side. We don't play in drug development, but digital intervention therapies, care management, health and wellness, caregiving, aging at home, areas like that. But yeah, so I'll stop here. I'm sure I'll get to talk ad nauseum about this. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Great. Hey, everybody. My name's Andy Greenberg. I work for Accenture in their digital health practice. I'm our lead for working with life sciences, mostly focused around R&D, where we're working with life sciences companies, med device, pharma, who are trying to bring digitalization to the process of bringing new drugs to market and digital for personalization of care for patients once drugs are in market, and dealing with a lot of the things that were talked about earlier today. So it's nice to be here. I've been with Accenture for about 2 years now, just as a step back. Prior to that, I was actually a startup guy. I've been in a number of startups around health and wellness and technology and behavior change. So, having been in companies that were all less than 100 people, I decided 400,000 would be a good change of pace. So I have a bit of a perspective from both sides now, but it's nice to be here and really impressed by the questions already today and excited to participate.
Hi, everybody. I think it's on. Kip Sirinakis, managing partner of Epidarex Capital. We're a transatlantic early-stage life science venture fund management group. We invest in everything from therapeutics to digital health, devices, diagnostics. Our goal is to look at really early technologies, primarily coming out of universities, but not exclusively, where we're giving the really early-stage capital, sometimes even seeding or starting these companies, pulling them out of universities, or even just with an inventor and a technology guy. So our goal is to get them through their seed and Series A financing and then bring it on to the life cycle of the company.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Smyth. I work for AstraZeneca and MedImmune. And I work in the office of the CTO. We have a small lab in Silicon Valley that focuses on innovation. It's a relatively new presence that we set up to try to tap into some of the innovations and fresh perspectives that are going on in Silicon Valley and elsewhere. Being in the IT group, we kind of look across the spectrum from development and discovery development and onto commercialization. So we look at how technology can help both our employees and our patients and customers. So, my group kind of focuses on looking at emerging trends, which ones are going to be relevant, and setting up partnerships, with startups or thought leaders or tech companies, and delivering small proof of concepts works to demonstrate the relevance. My background before that was actually not really in technology, although I have an engineering background. I worked in industry and consulting roles for many years on several different continents. I joined life sciences in the marketing company of AstraZeneca in Australia. And so I bring kind of a general business perspective and kind of multidisciplinary cross-industry focus.
My name is Neeta, Jain. I'm the CTO of Vibrent Health. I joined Vibrant around 2012, led all the R&D efforts, led the company through all the product development. Our company, Vibrant Health, has been selected by the NIH to be the exclusive technology partner to provide the participant technology, is the exclusive participant technology center for the Precision Medicine Initiative. For the folks who may not be aware, the Precision Medicine Initiative is one of its kind. It aims to engage and recruit more than 1 million participants over the next few years to collect behavioral, lifestyle, genomic, environmental data of these participants who are willing to donate the data, and provide analysis to help researchers come up with personalized treatment options. So I'm very proud to be a part of that, and thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. Any questions? So, but jokes aside, I think we may modify the structure slightly. Maybe somewhere along the way in the conversation, we'll solicit some questions. So do think, as we go through, if you do have some questions, we will come to you throughout the panel discussion to kind of not to leave it all at the end. So thank you very much. And again, thank you for participating in the panel. Let me kind of start off by shooting some numbers, right? So we heard from our keynote speakers, which were awesome, by the way, that there's this technology revolution happening, right? And then you look at some numbers, depending it's Rock Health, Startup Health, whatever it is, CBI, Insight, you go some numbers. So funding in 2011, 1.1 billion going into digital health. 2016, 4.2 billion. That's just Rock Health. You go to Startup Health, it's 0.5 billion to 6 billion. CBI says 2 billion to 2 billion. The point is, it's going up. The number of companies from 2011 to 2016, 81 to 296 companies, 147 to 918, according to Startup Health, and then 158 to 606. Again, proportionally increasing. So that tells me there's a lot happening, and we heard about it. So I'm going to kind of start a discussion with this question. Is this really truly a revolution? Revolution is a big word, and being part of the Soviet Union when I grew up in Armenia, having gone through a revolution, that means a significant change, which towards the end you hope to have a very good ending, and that's still questionable. Let me ask, and any of you guys could take this. This is kind of that freebie I'm going to throw out there, and then we'll go by the program, as I promise. Is this truly a revolution, or are we going to sit here in 10 to 20 years and say, that bubble burst again, and then we're starting from scratch? And I'm completely being provocative here, but you get what I'm saying. What are your thoughts on that? And anyone can kind of take this one and then build on it.
I guess I could start. I also am from the Soviet Union, so went through that revolution. So I don't think that health can escape the technology. Like, it has to adapt somehow. And as working in digital health now for several years, the large players are seeing that. It's not going to happen overnight, and there isn't going to be this, drastic change in health and the way that providers are giving care, and pharmaceutical companies. But in, I think, my lifetime and our lifetime, there will be a drastic change in the way that care is delivered. Even with, the cell phone, it's like 10 years old now. Imagine it's very early in the curve of adoption of something like this, of just seeing the kind of technologies that are coming out from that. It will change, just like our lives have changed with, something like this. But I don't think it'll happen tomorrow.
Yeah. So I'm from Connecticut, and really nothing's happened that different for a couple of hundred years. So I may not have quite as diverse a perspective. But so I think it's a really interesting question. I think that the technology is revolutionary, but I think there's drag in the system that might otherwise prevent the revolution from happening at the pace that it would. So whether that's regulatory drag, whether that's reimbursement model drag, but I also think there's fundamental human behavioral challenges to health. And so we can be better educated and we can better understand, but translating that into doing the right things to manage population health, I think there's still some fundamental hurdles there that will always be hard to address. So I guess I do think it's revolutionary what's going on, but I think that there are some very real hurdles to go over as you get there, and that some of those are so fundamental that I think the project to have us living to 200 there's a lot more behind that than just the biology. So I think it'll be an interesting thing to play out.
Any other takers?
Well, I don't disagree in the sense that I don't think it's a revolution. I don't think healthcare ever is a revolution. I think it's giving care, and the institutions around healthcare, regardless of what country you're in, work slowly, rely on data, rely on research, rely on a lot of things that technology can enhance and improve and speed up. And so what I think we're seeing is a lot of it's kind of one of the last industries, if you will, to start to embrace technology and figure out how to implement it and move it and put it together in order to have some more efficiencies in the market. I like your term of it's revolutionizing, but it's not a revolution yet, I don't think so.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe longer now, you used to always hear about the Uberization of healthcare, right? Every startup was going to be the Uber of healthcare, and I think it has proved a lot more difficult than that. At the same time, maybe not like a revolution as in the USSR, but maybe more like the Industrial Revolution. I do think some of these technologies are nearing a point now where, when you go from 80% to 90% is one thing, but when you go from that, Philip was mentioning the AI Awakenings paper, when all of a sudden the translation is good enough to use in your daily life, it's only maybe a small incremental improvement in the technology, but the impact is much greater. So, I do think that many people, it's sort of like peak oil, with revolution in healthcare, but at the same time, I do think the technology is approaching that point where we can expect more dramatic changes.
I agree with that. More than a revolution, I think it's an evolution. Technology has evolved to this extent that we can apply it to human beings and their health and personalizing it for their health. AI, much as we like to tout AI, it's really all about data mining and analyzing trends and helping the humans in the healthcare providers that are the humans to use that data to provide personalized options.
Great. So let's switch gears and already? That's a good sign. Shoot.
Like it.
Hi, thank you for the chance. My name is Olga. I'm a medical doctor from Indonesia. I'm now doing PhD in pediatrics at the University of Cambridge. So if you don't mind, I've got two questions. The first one, I'd like to know about your perspective about some underprivileged society, for instance, remote areas in Asia or Africa, which they haven't been exposed to technology as much as we have, and even in some areas, they still have limited electricity until now. Do you think there is a huge need to reach out those areas? Because as we know that those areas, usually they have the healthcare not in a good quality. Like for example, you can see that high infants and maternal mortality. And my second question, as we know that WHO defines being healthy as physically, mentally, and socially. I don't know, maybe I don't know much about it, but what do you think about the application of technology in helping mental health disorder, or at least maintaining our mental health? Thank you.
So I think we'll break that up if you don't mind. So the first question is around the access to this revolutionizing or evolving technology in parts of the world that may not be so advanced. So anyone, I think from maybe we'll hear from technology perspective. The second part is probably more so around, I would say, the type of, if I understood correctly, the type of solution, the technology solution, and maybe perhaps the kind of the health, the funding health aspect of it. There's the money going into those types of applications. So the first question, and access to that technology in the parts of the world that
So
it's not
I
so
can take the first question. We have done a lot of work in this space with underdeveloped, less developed countries. As we all know, thanks to the far-reaching internet, we have all these countries in Asia and Africa. We have a lot of users there that probably never worked on a PC, but have the internet through their mobile phones. So we have done a lot of work developing applications that can reach those populations. And we are also working on the concept of a healthcare kit, that can be that's distributed across those populations to maintain their health and collect enough data to then provide further options for them. So the kit includes, standard sensors like your blood pressure monitor and things like that. Whatever else, depending on whether it's maternal care or hypertension care or diabetes, depending on the population. I don't know if that answers your question, but we have done a lot of research and a lot of work around that.
Thank you. Does that answer the question? Okay. And the second part of the question is, I think, around the specific technologies, right?
Regarding mental health, because like, for example, I have the apps on my phone which enables me to scan my food barcode or take pictures of my food, and it's affecting mainly on my physical health. But how about mental health disorder, like for example depression or bipolar disorder, or how, do you know there is also a need to create a digital health application to maintain our mental health? Thank you.
So we have a big focus with our partners around behavioral and mental health. And it's a lot of big pharma. So Takeda, for example, is looking at digital interventions to help with the outcomes and efficacy and adherence of their mental health drugs. So that's depression, anxiety. We have a company that just went through our last batch. It's called Leaf Therapeutics. You wear a patch that when it's around anxiety, so when your heartbeat starts to go up, it sends you an alert to basically teach you a breathing exercise. So it's more taking control of, using the tools to help augment how you react to stress factors. So we see a lot of things like that around mindfulness. So there's a lot of meditation apps and tools that you could use in conjunction with your mental health therapy to help speed up outcomes. So we've seen a lot around behavioral health.
I think there's also been, studies about, we think about these previously unmeasurable kind of data sets. So even metadata from your phone that's tracking, your location, who and how long your conversations are, and these sorts of things, at least in earlier studies, are starting to be used to become predictive of, if you're being cut off from your social circle and so on. So I think there will continue to be a lot of innovation and application in that area.
I would also just add, I think in some cases in the U.S. where telemedicine was probably the real driver for the VA to allow telemedicine was for treating PTSD for vets returning who otherwise couldn't get access. So I think it was brought up in a couple of the points in the keynote that the lack of connection between where there's care can be delivered and where the need is, I think will help drive this further. And probably seen some of the recent news about Facebook even trying to do some things where they're recognizing what's happening to try to provide intervention. So I think this is a really exciting space. I think it's a really important space, and I do think there'll be continued evolution both on the technology and other sides.
Yes, it's kind of interesting on the depression side. I think it was 23andMe that ran a huge study in collaboration with Pfizer. I think it was like a 450 patient population study in the attempt of trying to find certain markers that could potentially help them select or stratify patients who would be at higher risk. So if that's of interest, please check it out. It's actually a phenomenal way of using the 23andMe data sets, if you will, or the database to run a study. But if there are no more questions, let me come back to just to remind you. So we're kind of.
Your
see
job's
this?
gonna be easy today.
These are all the questions we prepared for you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Richard First. I appreciate the discussion so far. I come from Sahlgrenska Academy in Sweden. I have a question that I hope it's not completely out of scope, but listening to previous speakers and topic right now about digitization and the impact of that. To give you some background, I have a military background, also work with the US equivalent with or Swedish equivalent to Federal Emergency Agency. And then I'm thinking the vulnerabilities, there are a lot of opportunities, but also vulnerabilities with basing a lot of healthcare on telecommunications. And what do we do, or are the thoughts on if we get a power shortage or ransom malware like we saw a few weeks ago? Do you have any takes on that? I don't want to put you on the spot, but yeah.
You're not putting me on the spot because I'm the moderator, so I'm going to turn to my panel.
So, go ahead.
I wanted to clarify the question if you
Well, I think, I was going to answer it in one part of it on the cyber front, on the cybersecurity side of things. I know we've seen, we're based here in Maryland, and there's a strong cyber community here. Obviously, there's a few lettered agencies nearby. So we are seeing a lot of kind of startups coming in that are actually looking at and trying to tackle some of the cyber healthcare problems, if you will, both within the hospitals and then, kind of with patient records and kind of within the patient. So I think it's an identified problem. I'm not sure there's enough resources going towards it. Perhaps maybe after 2017 being the AI year, maybe 2018 will be the cyber health year or something. I don't know. But from that perspective, it truly is a vulnerability but there are, just like in so many other things that you're taking technology and applying it to a different industry, people are starting to figure out how we can take the kind of premises under kind of regular cyber, issues and move it into healthcare.
Great. So we're actually here to talk about the commercialization of some of these digital solutions. The audience here is very interested, and they're by entrepreneurs, startup owners, founders, postdocs, PhDs who have, in a very high sense, talented, young talent sitting in the room is interested in understanding how do we move these solutions, these products, through the commercialization path. What are some of the pathways to commercialization, right? So maybe, I think, Kip, in your introduction, you alluded to, sorry while you take your water break, but some of this, where does the innovation or the solution originate? Right? You mentioned the academic setting. Can we talk a little bit about that? How does that come about? What are the kind of the naturally evolving steps? And then we can actually ask some of the other panelists to think about kind of where do you come in with your role in terms of kind of taking that further and further all the way out to commercialization.
So it's interesting. I find with healthcare, it comes, the idea or the innovation actually comes from almost anywhere. I was at a doctor appointment the other day, and the new doctor, and he found out I was a venture capitalist, and he's like, I need you to talk to my partner because he and I are working on a new digital health solution to a problem that we have in our practice. I'm like, okay, can we talk about the thing I came in on? But nevertheless, so that's just an example of, we see things coming out of researchers in the lab, PhD students, engineering students. We see a lot of innovations that we see right now are coming out of the medical academic centers where a doctor or someone has a technology or needs to find a solution to a technology. And they're getting more digitized, if you will, because many of the young doctors actually grew up on playing video games and things like that. And so they're actually much more accustomed to thinking in that respect and trying to solve the problem from a technology, not just, let's say, an engineering solution if it's a medical device, and moving into the into kind of innovating and thinking that way. So from our perspective, we, as an early stage, we see it from students, from professors, from researchers, from doctors. We see it from, technology executives, people that have made their money in cyber or software or other places that, have maybe gotten older and are realizing that they are, as a consumer of healthcare, having issues and thinking, I can figure out how to solve this problem from a technology standpoint, and kind of marrying up with the clinical side or the technical side of healthcare. So, do you want me to keep going, or I can let anybody else jump in?
Maybe I would kind of turn to Neeta on this one as well, since you're part of that ecosystem.
Right. So for us, commercialization, we've been, success for us has come through public-private partnerships. We have really focused on that ecosystem, building partnerships with private industry, with researchers, academicians, so on and so forth. We have several examples. There's one that we've worked with an institute for a solution for type 1 diabetes, creating the artificial pancreas. So the actual sensor is embedded into the patient's body. And while it monitors the insulin levels and analyzes the data, our solution reads that data and sends instructions to the pump that is attached to the patient's body to then inject the appropriate amount of insulin and at the appropriate time. We have similar examples. I mean, we've worked with the American Association of Dermatology. We've had a long-standing partnership with them to build our teledermatology products. We have partnered with NIH several years. We went through multiple research, small grants, and now we are at, we've been selected as a technology partner for the Precision Medicine Initiative. So all these examples just show, just go to prove to us that that is a sure path to commercial success. Working very closely with private industry, but at the same time leveraging academicians and research institutes because of their reach to human subjects, via healthcare systems, via hospitals, etc.
Thank you for that. And maybe, Julie, I can turn to you. The role of plug and play, right? The value propositions that you guys bring in, it's a bit different, obviously, what Neeta just described. Can you focus on that? And maybe just a quick reminder, we have an audience that's diverse and from all over the globe. So maybe add the component of the kind of the global reach of plug and play, and how do you kind of promote the technologies and move them down the pipe?
Sure. And just from the idea phase, just a quick, with the visibility I have into the other industries with healthcare, more than anything, a lot of the ideas of these companies come from personal frustration with the healthcare system here in the country, whether it's an entrepreneur that was sick themselves and didn't get the help that they needed, and then decided to venture out on their own and find a solution that would work for them, to a sick child or someone in your family that, so more than anything, it's born out of these personal experiences I've seen, and then there's a lot of passion backing it, because you're working for your kid or yourself or your mother. But yeah, so with Plug and Play, we help. We're really good as far as, we're not in that early incubation phase as much as we're good at helping companies in that $1 million valuation to about 10 million, where it's beyond 2 guys and a dog in a garage. A lot of them have customers already, have a proven business plan, revenue, and we help their path to commercialization through these matchmaking, through the corporations. So we let the corporates kind of validate the technology and help bring it to market in a lot of cases. And we have a wide reach around the globe. So we have a lot of healthcare companies that are trying to, it's easier to get through regulatory pathways in places like Europe and China. So we have offices there where we could help them and connect them to providers or consumer healthcare companies or pharma in those areas to run pilots, to have licensing deals, things like that. So we kind of work with those companies that are ready to partner with large corporations at that point.
Hey, do you guys have any perspective to add?
I can add an add-on if you guys. So the one thing that we talked about earlier, that this kind of is it a revolution, and how you mentioned how many dollars are kind of pouring into digital health. And I think it's important to note that a lot of that is because the ability to get customers easily, or the ability to actually, right now get traction and have an idea, put some technology behind it, and go kind of test it, makes the investment in that accelerated and frankly a lot easier. I mean, we do all kinds of life science investing, and it's hard to get money for for drugs and diagnostics and sometimes devices. But we see that there's a lot more money going into the kind of digital health side, because you can get that real time, get an idea, move it forward, use an accelerator. There's a lot of resources in the kind of digital health ecosystem that are coming to play that help commercialize it faster. And the one thing that's really important in our perspective from a funding standpoint is to make sure that if you have that great idea, making sure you have more than a data set of one, that somebody really is going to use it, and if it makes sense, and how it's going to work, and really start to validate it. I think that's an important part, that sometimes when people are starting companies, they think it's the best idea in the world, but they don't go out and kind of test the customer base. And I think that's where some of the early money is kind of going into and getting traction on it. So I don't know if I just took it in another direction, but
I mean, I think even from what I see, kind of working in a pharma environment, there's sort of two angles where we see companies coming in. So, one is sort of from this performance wellness space, kind of then coming down into chronic disease management and behavioral change, and then the other is more scientifically driven, from more of almost a precision medicine, and then how we incorporate that. Usually that's sort of in the preclinical or clinical trial phase, and the outcome is more around discovery. I think, maybe 5 years ago, we would see almost digital health as patient support programs 2.0, right? Instead of giving you a leaflet explaining, how your medicine was working and what it was going to do, you'd get an app, and there would be a little bit of lifestyle kind of information as well. But with these more sophisticated mobile and health solutions, you can start to do that. It's not and there it's really about trying to solve the medication adherence problem that's kind of plagued healthcare for so many years, and still I would say there's been progress but hasn't been solved. So I think those are the two angles that I see as well, and maybe they're starting to converge a little in the middle. One thing I would say that I've noticed now is I think having startups think early, if they are planning to go into the healthcare space, about how they're going to clinically validate and create evidence for their findings, especially if they come from that more consumer-oriented mindset.
Yeah, and as for AstraZeneca in a broader sense, it includes MedImmune. I think, we have about 800 or so, 850 active collaborations, and a good chunk of that, which is essentially the feeder into our pipeline, is the academic setting. I mean, that's something that we take very seriously. I don't know if Bahija touched on that or not, but whether it's a specific asset or a particular disease area or digital technology, I think it all comes down to, for us at least, the way we approach it is a specific need or a problem that we're trying to solve anywhere within our development cycle, and then we find the right partners to do that. And so that alignment is very key, and then we find internal champions to push that forward. So maybe I can switch gears to maybe a little bit of money, right? Kip, it's probably going to come to you, but others can chime in. But
it always comes down to money.
I cited some numbers, and at least I would like to know, maybe the audience does too, in terms of what's the future looking like? What are some of the trends in the funding from your perspective? And then maybe as part of that answer would be, you can give us some light into the types of technology. What is it that you're looking for as you kind of go about your day-to-day, if you will?
So we're seeing, I think, all across certainly healthcare, and especially in the digital health, the seed or the kind of small Series A round has pretty much gone away, except for funds like us, actually. But these big rounds, the Grail Series A, these are mega rounds that are throwing a lot of money at problems. Controversially, perhaps, I'm not sure that's the best way to build a company, but nevertheless, that's a whole probably different discussion. But nevertheless, the fact that there is a lot of money being poured into some of these companies in the digital health space, they do have a little bit more traction than an early drug company or something. And usually there's a beta, there's some early customers, there's some early revenue in there, and that's important to kind of skyrocket the growth of the companies. We are looking at and seeing digital health in almost every aspect of healthcare that we see, from the pharmaceutical, from therapeutics, people building, looking at sequencing and things like that. We're seeing a lot in AI, where the convergence, if you will, of medical devices and the technology arm of it, if you will, the non-engineering technology part of it. You saw GraphWorks today earlier, a local company here that we looked at. I think they were at Hopkins. So there, anywhere you go, we're seeing a lot of different things, and for us, we're kind of kid in a candy store. We're able to really kind of look hard, and it's a very difficult, because we're trying to make sure that it's not just a one product solution. We still do go back to the fundamentals of building a good business that's investable via VC. You've got to have the market need. You've got to look at the competition. I think a lot of the entrepreneurs don't look at the competition, and try and look at how this company is going to get from here to there. So.
Let me build on that. Maybe I'll direct this to either Andy or Neeta. You guys pick who starts off. Maybe it makes sense for you to start off. But it sounds like the future is still bright. Obviously, there's still money going into this space. From your experience, I think it's important for us to talk about some of the things that essentially don't allow for these ideas to move forward. They fail at inception. What are the reasons and why? What have you seen? What can you kind of talk about at the very early stage? What is it that you've seen that doesn't allow for the technology to actually evolve and turn into a venture or a company?
I think Andy drew attention to that right in the beginning. It is the drag, reimbursement models. There was another thing you mentioned, and I'm forgetting. Regulatory.
We'll talk about that.
Lot of our ideas, we've had failures. We've had successes, but we've had our share of failures, and we think we have a great idea, but market is not ready for it. Healthcare moves slow.
I think the third I would add, and this may sometimes come into play later, is this goes a little bit, and by the way, I think being passionate about your idea is critical to its success. So I want to temper this a little bit, but in almost every other industry, if you can get frictionless right with your digital experience, if I can make it easier to tap my phone to pay than to grab my wallet, I might be able to win. But when you're talking about healthcare, the idea of will the individual actually use the thing that you've developed, even if it's technically brilliant, is really a big deal. Like I can't drive that home hard. My mother-in-law was a fall risk, and so we got her one of those PERS, personal emergency response systems. I may be dating myself, but I've fallen and I can't get up button for those of you who may remember. It was terrible commercials they used to run in the U.S. Anyway, so we got her one of these, and we were out at brunch with her, and she wasn't wearing it. We said, Grammy, why aren't you wearing your button? She said, well, it doesn't go with my blouse. And so, the thing you have to realize is how people are deciding whether or not to do this is not necessarily based on the rational clinical value of it. The decisions they make are driven from many more complicated places. And I just think being aware of that as you think about your ideas is a really important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I mean, I think that is the same actually with the healthcare professional, the doctor, the clinician. I think, Kim, you mentioned, data is still very important, and making sure that there is kind of sound research behind it, or that there's, you're not going to get a clinician to adopt a technology until they feel that they can rely on it. And part of it's a little difficult because on one hand, some of them are also concerned, especially on the AI front and some of that it reduces the relevance of the clinician. And so in order for them to kind of feel really good about it, they've got to make sure that it actually is technologically and not actually more than just technologically sound, but from a data set, it actually has, gives you the significance and all the information that they would have. So it goes on the consumer end as well as, I think, on the clinician and on the healthcare providers end of its, we're talking about lives, and so making sure that the technology is sound and there's data behind it is important for this industry.
And I think it's interesting because that can be sort of a blessing and a curse in a way, right? That need. I think what you can often have as a result of that drag is people circumventing it altogether, right? And then that creates a whole new, maybe not a drag on innovation, but an obstacle when there's unvalidated information out there, and is health literacy of general populations up to being able to separate kind of what will really work and what won't. So.
Yeah, and throughout the validation process, we've seen a lot of the early companies, it's kind of death by pilot. While running their expensive, a lot of these providers and companies in general will run a pilot without ever considering being a customer in the long run. And so we've seen all of these companies that are running pilots to gather the data, and then they're not gathering any revenue or customers in the process, and that's killed a lot of the early stage technology companies I've seen.
I think you alluded to a very good point. The most success we've had is with programs where we have made the provider's job easier. We've provided them with enough data and enough trends and the kind of applications that they can use to work with their patients and give personalized care. And those are the kind of programs that we have been really successful with. Understanding that at the end of the day, health is about humans. The provider is a human. Your machine cannot replace that human. So that was a very good point.
And most of the health systems that we see, I mean, it's obviously they want to have good care. But it is a business, even though they might be a nonprofit. And I think one of the earlier presenters had the slide up there about, having quality health care at affordable and changing the system. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when we see our digital health companies kind of pitching their idea, the question to them is, how is this going to save the hospital money? All those kinds of things, because those are the questions that the decision maker is going to have.
It's like there's a barrier too. When we talk to providers, you cannot increase the workflow or the length of the appointment. Absolutely. That is just a non-starter. No matter it almost feels like no matter how great it would be, first work within that constraint.
Yeah, maybe let's take this a little further, right? So we heard from Michael from IBM around this the three things, right? Around maybe I try to write them as fast as I can, but around more or less population health, quality care, and then the cost of care, right? Those are the three things that IBM is focused on, and everyone should be focused on. Maybe not to provoke any comments from Michael if he's still here, but what I don't hear or see is more emphasis on risk and compliance. Let me bring you back to our world. Drug development, highly regulated. You live and die by the regulations, and we'll maybe focus on that as well in our discussion. But let's talk about the risks associated with some of these technologies. Well, let's say AI, right? We talk so much about it, but I'm curious to understand, maybe you can share with the audience, what are some of the risks that we should be talking about today? And again, there's a reason why we have all the players from various, from the ecosystem here on the panel to kind of share those perspectives. I'm curious, and you can't all agree with each other. That's another rule now. So no more agreement on the panel.
So even if we agree, we've got to.
Yeah, if you agree,
All right.
just provoke.
Let me start with, I think that's a terrible question.
I agree. Oh, wait.
All right, you can disagree with each other, not the moderator. No, with all seriousness, I think it's worthwhile to talk about, you know, the risks, the hurdles of these digital solutions coming to life. And I just want to kind of get different perspectives to the audience. What have you seen? What is it that we should be talking about? I know we touched on some of it already, but just kind of to put that a little more up there.
I'll start. So
You disagree with me, so I'm going to look at you.
Yeah, there you go. So I think, you know, we heard a question about part of this, which is there's certainly the whole security aspect of this, and I think there's multiple levels of that. The prospect of somebody hacking my artificial pancreas is, you know, forgetting my Tesla, right? Like these are scary things, and we have to acknowledge that those are real. So I think there's some pieces of security within the technology. I think in some ways, as I talk to different R&D departments of pharma companies, and I'll be interested to hear your comment on this as well, but I think it's interesting that historically the idea of a clinical trial is you want to take as many variables as you can out of the equation when you're bringing a new drug to market. And so I have two groups. I want to know there's nothing different between them except these, you know, the medication. And you introduce digital, and it creates this opportunity for this wealth of new data that I can have as part of that trial that could inform better treatment protocols and better results. But it's sort of counter to the way that the idea of what a trial was supposed to accomplish in the past. So I think that's I think that there's some organizational inertia that's a real hurdle to get over. I was joking with Michael earlier. We were talking to some companies that there's some things going on in Europe right now around digital that they're literally just waiting for a couple of the investigators to retire because until they can't get them past their view of how digital plays into this. I mean, it's, you know, it's as crazy as that sounds. So I think that's a, you know, a real hurdle. I do think it's encouraging, just so we're not totally raining out, that there was just an article. The FDA had talked earlier in the year about spinning up a division for digital health of people who have expertise in this area. I think that's actually an encouraging sign. There's still a little bit of the wild, wild west on what is and isn't regulated. So I think the idea that that'll happen will help. But I think it's enormously different than the way things have been done before. And I think maybe that's the biggest hurdle to get over.
Oh, what part of this hurdle, the issue is, you know, this convergence, right? It's almost like sometimes I joke with my kids, I'm like, imagine you're on a playground and none of the kids speak the same language. What are you going to do? Can you play with them? It's like, well, it'll be hard, but maybe I can try to learn their language. So we got the technology companies, we heard from them today, doing this research, generating data that could be potentially changing the way we look at drug development. I think it's early, but still, that's the intent. Then you got the scientists or the physicians that are trained and have a different mind, right? My whole, you know, engineers are from Venus and scientists or doctors are from Mars. Is that part of that issue? Or is that getting better? I have to believe there's some sort of a lack of kind of understanding each other. If I'm oversimplifying, of course, but maybe, I don't know, Kim, from your perspective, I know you talk to a lot of companies, and what's your perspective on that?
There's a couple of ways of answering that. Maybe I'll just say, maybe stepping out of my AstraZeneca hat and just in my Kim hat. One of the things I find sort of simultaneously very exciting but also terrifying about digital health is how new sources of data that are, you know, very, you know, prevalent, almost omnipresent, you know, and growing every day can ultimately be predictive of health. And there's a lot of excitement about early diagnosis, early detection of disease, predicting and then intervening to prevent, say, an asthma exacerbation, that otherwise might take you to the ER. So that's very exciting. I think the other side of that coin is that a lot of the regulation and so on is around sort of structured or traditional sources of healthcare data in a research context. So when you take it out of that into the real world, and when maybe the combination of your social media feeds, your car taking your vital signs, your echo in your home, et cetera, are actually providing probably your videos that you're putting up on YouTube, could well create a better picture of your current health and your likely risk profile than anything in your EMR. That sort of leads to privacy concerns, but I also think it's sort of an ethical debate for us to have from many different perspectives, not just medical and technological, but as a society about, personal responsibility for your health care and where dollars will be spent in the future. So, I think that's one of the, I've sort of lost track of your original question, sorry, but that's one of the dilemmas I think that we're going to face.
But don't you think, to some extent, all the onslaught of, I get in my car and I can have my heart rate and this constant information on my health, back to the mental health question. On one hand, it's a great thing. On the other hand, it could provide a great deal of stress and lack of that personal connection that you're relying on your digital. And I'm really taking this off into a whole different conversation now, sorry. But you told me not to agree, so I'm...
Well, I disagree with that emphatically. I think information overload is a clear sort of short-term problem, right? But over time, I think we will get better at separating both the signal from the noise and then moving to more monitoring and alerting when there's a problem as opposed to reporting on, look at my blood pressure,
And that's where the technology companies come in, right? Making sense of that data, being able to intelligently throw away the noise, and mining that data appropriately.
Yeah, one of the players that we work with is insurance companies, so health insurers and self-payers, large employers. And it gets to the point when we do have all this data and we can intelligently mine, what you're doing to your body and what your health is, it gets to a point too where it's like the sick will become pretty much uninsurable and the healthy will have their premiums go all the way down. And where do we draw that line of, what is so much monitoring that there's that moral point too that we see with especially the health insurance companies, which you could have all the data, but is that a good thing for some people?
And what you do with it, the responsibility of what you do with it.
But coming to your original question about hurdles, so the obvious hurdles about data security and privacy, but in the health tech field, the technology companies, I think a large hurdle is keeping the patient engaged.
Mm-hmm.
How strong is your solution? How engaging is it? Are you working with the changing trends? Are you still even a year ago? Things have changed, so constantly keeping up with the changes in technology, the changes in user experiences, etc. Patient engagement is really critical to success, collecting data.
We've seen that too with especially your mental health question from before. It's the sickest people, so it's probably a really depressed person will be less engaged in one of these solutions than a healthy person that's just using a mindfulness app or something to become a little happier throughout the day, but already is fine. An obese person with type 2 diabetes is less apt to use a food tracking app. So it's how do you engage that sickest population that needs it the most? Because it's the healthy people that are self-motivated and beating each other in Fitbit. That's not who we're targeting. How do you get that sick population to actually engage, which is a lot harder.
Good point. I think we have a question.
Yeah. I'm Wei Jie. I co-founded a vaccine company spun out from Hopkins. And so I do understand the challenges of regulation and scaling up. And my question, along the lines of disagreeing with the panel, it's,
I like it.
You have brought up the challenges of regulations and scaling a company, and I guess the bulk, or the reason why all of us are here today is because we have learned to not take no for an answer. And when we hear stuff about the regulations are too much of a burden, we think about what can we do to solve it? How can we overcome this? Because to Kim's point, about Uberization of medical care, the reason, my sense of how Uber overcame it is, when it first started, the cab companies were saying there's no way you can do it, but Uber was just like, screw it, I'm going to raise a ton of money, I'm just going to get into the cities, but get buy-in from the consumers, and then we can change policy. Obviously, there are multiple caveats between a transportation company and medical care, but from your perspective, is there anything that we can do collectively, both from a biotech startup and the venture capital and the pharma space, to sort of push, lower the barriers for good innovative ideas, those that have sort of figured out their product market fit, and make sure that those ideas succeed in the marketplace?
Very good segue to our next topic anyways. But no, that's a very good point. So you heard a lot of the things that are happening. Every one of these folks are doing things within their organization, within their powers. I believe, from at least pharma perspective, there is more we can do. So I think your question is, how can we as an ecosystem collectively, what more can we do to continue delivering meaningful solutions to our patients? I do agree, we're in this business for our patients, right? So I guess maybe if I paraphrase the question is, what can we collectively do? And then you can't give the same answer. To be better at providing this, moving the solutions forward, bringing it to the patients. From bench to bedside.
So I could start that one because that's what Plug and Play is trying to do with this open innovation platform. But I think what has helped that we've seen is in our model, we don't sell exclusivity to any one company. So just because we sign one pharma, it doesn't mean that we wouldn't bring another one to the table to look at the same set of technologies together. And that scarcity, where you could go internally as a person on the innovation team to your C-suite and say that a direct competitor is also looking at that technology, gets the wheels moving a little bit faster. And there's really archaic companies that, sometimes it takes 3 months just to get through an NDA, which is a lifetime in a startup's land, especially an early stage company. So all of a sudden they're, cutting down the paperwork and cutting down their supplier process to at least run a pilot or a proof of concept or get the licensing agreement through. And that helps, because just the timing, the slow timing of how pharma works, how healthcare works, how providers work, I've seen kill a lot of companies. And so one of the questions we ask right away of our partners is, how long is your NDA agreement? If it's over like 2 pages of legal back and forth and legalese and all this stuff, that could kill them. So we try to kind of have that model help the companies at least get engagement quicker, our startups.
Maybe a bit of a spin to that. We talked about patient engagement as a hurdle, right? So what should we be doing? What can we do to release some of the pressure off that hurdle, at least that one?
Just constant innovation, continuous understanding of the population. What worked last year may or may not continue to work now just because of changing trends in technology. My kids were on Facebook before I was. I got on there a year later, and now all the grandparents are on Facebook and kids are out. So as technologists, we have to understand those trends and keep up with them. If we have an idea, how is that idea going to scale over the time horizon that our industry forces us to live in? I think that's the big one.
Yeah, so I have a slightly different take. See, I'm trying to, I violently disagree.
With your slightly different take.
Yeah, with my slightly different take. So I think this is actually where some of the technologies can really come into play in a different way. So we've talked a lot about things like AI in drug development. We talk a lot about personalization as it pertains to the treatment protocol. But I think where there's real opportunity around human behavior is to personalize the actual experience. And so, you think about, we're talking about apps, and to be a little overly, like, kind of apps on your phone are dead, right? You don't go into your app anymore to communicate with somebody. You expect it to show up as a text message. You expect it to show up in some other way. You expect to have Alexa or Google Home speak to you. But it isn't just that they should speak to you. There was a comment earlier about, in translation, what's the voice it should be in? Do I need a sarcastic kick in the butt to take my medication, and somebody else might need a pat on the back? And by the way, does that change on a given day based on how I slept last night? So I think that the opportunity is realizing that it really is an N=1 solution from an experiential standpoint, from a personal perspective. And that if we're going to move people on, that's going to do it. You layer on the reduction in the number of doctors who are available to treat, the idea of chatbots that are suddenly enormously smarter and contextually aware, I think could start to get at that.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the potentials of digital health is that it puts more power or potentially more control in the hand of patients, right? And one of the trends driving it is this ability of patients, we haven't talked really about social aspects of apps and sort of peer-to-peer, but I think that can also be mobilized to create change and regulations as, customers' expectations and patients' expectations, increase, that they will start demanding, these sorts of, this level of care and these levels of service. So, one of the big aha moments, I suppose, when I joined the pharmaceutical industry from a consumer background was that we kept saying patients and not customers, because the customer was really the doctor, right? So that's a barrier when you go to try to create the kind of rich, experience that you're talking about. Because in many cases, we don't even see the world of the patient. We think of them as a recipient of healthcare services as opposed to someone with choice, So I think that's a mindset shift, but also, tapping into getting closer to that patient experience, and then patients will advocate for the things that they need as well.
But the interesting thing is, you bring up a really good point, because actually that speaks to business model then. How do you converge we got to make sure the patient feels great, and the patient wants a certain kind of technology or is used to using technology, but they're not willing to pay for it. And so the health systems and the doctors and all of the more staid institutions are the ones that have to figure out how to, or the insurance company or whoever it is, and they're not as necessarily, they're many years usually lagging in bringing the technology forward. And because those institutions are so big, by the time they implement the technology is old. Look at the EHRs. When those things, the EHRs got implemented, the government paid a lot of money.
Yep.
The systems were not so good. And so it's an interesting challenge. And back to, I think, the original question, which is back to that original question, is figuring out how to actually engage and move fast enough all the people in the ecosystem to be able to shift quick enough, in my perspective, to because technology can change easily. People don't, and institutions don't, and the FDA doesn't. The FDA is doing a good job of reaching out to people in the ecosystem as they're trying to develop these new kind of programs in the device and other spaces. And so I think what we can all do is figure out ways to make sure that what we've done here is bringing people with different backgrounds in to try and keep solving the problem and talking to them, and then responding quickly makes most sense to me.
We have a question.
Hi, my name is Kevin Chendrov. I'm a resident at Johns Hopkins Hospital. So we've alluded to healthcare costs a lot and sicker populations, and I think it's notable that probably about 5% of the US population accounts for about half of healthcare spending. And these are the people that are really difficult to reach and to impact their health meaningfully. And in the hospital, I will often see the same patients with numerous comorbidities come in every month, maybe even every few weeks to the hospital again and again and again for the same problems. And obviously, we try to impact their health in a meaningful way to prevent that from happening, but it's very difficult. So what's the role of technology in changing that? How can we break the cycles of poor health in these really ill patients who are really making enormous expenditures on the healthcare system and account for some of the reasons that the US has such high spending with not such great outcomes? Thank you.
I'll take a shot at that. So this is a very good example. Would it help you, the provider, if that patient didn't come in, every couple of weeks or every couple of months, and you had a way to interact with them on a regular, semi-regular basis? Really what the patient needs at the end of the day is to feel connected and to know that I'm being heard. My voice is being heard, the system understands me, they're taking care of me. So that's where technology comes in, is to prevent those high-risk patients from coming in and again, as at the same time taking care of them, assuring them that the system cares for you, we've got you covered. And technology plays a big part in that. We have done a lot of work, actually, we've worked with Johns Hopkins, defining and designing programs just for that.
I feel like there's a couple of themes there as well. And I can't help but to say, as far as is that therapy or that treatment for that patient, did we know if that patient would respond, right? I mean, that's one of the bigger questions that MedImmune, at least, and AstraZeneca are trying to answer in our trials. Will this patient respond to the drug? So I think there's a lot of effort ongoing from at least pharma side to try to understand the markers, mine the markers, longitudinal studies to mine the data to understand which patient population will respond to any particular therapy. But I think the other part of that is adherence, right? I mean, we had separate conversations, a little bit here as well. Can we talk a little bit about that and this kind of open floor? I have heard, and through at least one source, they worked with a pharma company, this consulting company. They'd done an evaluation around compliance around a particular therapy, or a commercial drug, I'm sorry. And number one reason for a lack of adherence was that, that prescription doesn't even get filled, right? So there's like that gap between a prescription gets written or typed up or called in, and it never gets filled. So the patient never goes and follows through. From your perspective, number one, is that a valid concern? Or what are some of the other parts of its adherence that we should be looking at as a collective ecosystem, if you will?
So I think, as we were talking about earlier, adherence is an enormously complicated problem, and I think one of the presumptions that that's sometimes out there is people don't take their meds because they forgot, and that's a very dangerous assumption. I think that there's all kinds of complex behavioral reasons people don't take their drugs. We were working with a cancer support community, and they found they had as much trouble with people not taking drugs because of side effects as they did because they were feeling great, and sick people don't need to take pills, right? I mean, which seems like insanity, but it is reality. So one of the areas that we've been exploring is there are these key decision points. So the patient who showed up, if you looked at actually their health when they came in, did they even need to be there? And what were the things that led up to them making the decision to come into the ER? And going back to some of the AI discussions and others, can we start to move upstream to understand the things that triggered that, and then maybe what interventions we could put in place? And again, it's going to be personalized, but I think there's an opportunity to to look at those key moments that happen along the way that lead up to that decision to show up at the ER again. And one of them may well be, is the drug working or not? But it may be something else entirely. It may be they just feel like they need to be heard. And are there other ways to intervene? But I think if we can use technology to understand the pieces that are around it, it'll allow us to be maybe more targeted in our approach to fixing it.
Before we get to that question, I just want to finish this. AI is it's important to get to questions, but I just want to hit on the AI topic, right? There's so much hype around AI. We heard from a couple of companies. We heard about, some progress and significant progress. And we see this in our world as well around imaging. I mean, no question about it. I mean, we're seeing some real value coming out of deep learning, machine learning, we'll call it whatever it is, in that space. The question is, put that aside. Where is AI going, right? I guess, where are some of the trends? What's the next? Are we going to start, I read an article, and I just had it here in terms of people talking about apps being diagnostics, and I think we talked about voice recognition. This particular app was around cough recognition. So you don't even have to go. You cough into an app, and you already know what you got. So something. Where is AI going? I guess let's just kind of philosophical debate here in terms of what are we going to see next, or maybe assumptions, or there's no right or wrong here, right? You're just being recorded, that's all.
No tapes.
What's the next wave? I guess, what's the next space that we could see some, potential AI applications?
I mean, I don't think it's fully matured in healthcare in any way yet. I think it's just the beginning, and we've seen a couple of AI applications go through our program, but nothing that's actually intelligent. Like, they claim to be AI, but when you really dig down to it, it's not. It's data mining. I think there's a long way to go. I haven't seen anything that I would personally invest in that I could say is an AI application for our technology. I think there's a lot of applications for it and a lot of places where it could go. I do not think it has matured to be looking at the next frontier. I don't think we've reached this one.
So I know you want us to disagree, but I completely agree with her. What is AI? Do we have a definition? Is there a taxonomy? Really, there isn't. In the health space, in the health tech space, it's really about data analysis more than artificial intelligence. It's using, of course, the right algorithms to analyze that data, spot trends that help providers, prevent conditions, treat conditions in time, help the pharmaceutical industries. But these machines cannot be making those decisions. I don't think that's going to happen in the very near future. We won't have machines making decisions at all. Even though the app may recognize the cough and may suggest diagnostic options, but I'm sure the patient in that case would go back to the provider and confirm that diagnosis before starting any treatment. So it's really all about understanding data. It's about collecting different disparate sources of data to help the provider come up with options. So that's what we are doing with the Precision Medicine Initiative. We collect lifestyle and behavioral data through our solutions, and then we have different sources of data, the EMRs, the genomic data, environmental, so on and so forth. And then we're going to put these machine learning experts, write algorithms, spot trends, help come up with personalized options for treatment and things like that. That's the goal. That's the aim of this Precision Medicine Initiative, and it's a lofty goal, but we are in it for the next 5 years.
Thank you for that. I think we'll take the question. Sorry.
Eugene Shenderov, actually Kevin's brother, so I'm going to piggyback off of his comment. And I'm an oncology fellow at Johns Hopkins. And you guys are having a fantastic discussion. And the reason I'm piggybacking off of this question is, I want to reframe it just a tiny bit. We know that for all the best intentions, sometimes things go awry. We know that recently there's been a lot of data that you can take artificial intelligence in the internet age, for example, hiring people, and you can train machines, and somehow they inherit our biases, right? They become racist machines. You've seen the news. I helped start Charm City Clinic, which is a nonprofit health clinic in Baltimore that cooperates with both Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland and the Baltimore City Health Department. And we treat the most disadvantaged people potentially living next door to Hopkins or University of Maryland for various reasons. And one of the things we were highly surprised by was that one of the key things that we hadn't appreciated for why people weren't coming to Hopkins or Maryland or getting health care even at the City Health Department was they didn't have birth certificates. All of a sudden, they didn't have birth certificates. And you step back and you go, oh my God, so if we can just get them a birth certificate, they can suddenly get plugged into the system. And then you realize, you step back another step and you realize that if you come with one perceived idea that there are ways to help them with their health problems in small ways, you step back and you realize, actually there's a big disconnect, there's something you have to realize. They don't even have health on their radar because they don't have a birth certificate. And so I just would caution the idea that if we're talking about AI and everything like that, and I'm hoping you guys are thinking about this, I don't want it to be training a system that benefits folks like us and somehow forgets to look kind of in the background at potentially the biases inherent in what we're making so that the system doesn't run away being trained that all barbells have arms instead of that barbells are barbells.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point as a follow-up to the previous conversation. I mean, a lot of times we focus so much on technology and some of the sickest patients don't have access to it, whether it's here in this country in some neighborhood in Baltimore or earlier in the day, somebody mentioned, some remote area in a developing world. So, part of that brings it back, I think, to the concept of healthcare is still about the people, and the system may become more efficient by using technology, but there's still, and this is what makes it challenging in every country, I think, to deliver that healthcare, people need to be involved in some way to get to the people that maybe don't have the wealth or don't have the education or aren't feeling, or feeling healthy or whatever the reason that they're not getting, they are we have to figure out a way to get to the sickest people, and that does mean people and heavy lifting is involved in that. So I think I have to agree with you, which I'm not allowed to agree with anything anymore, but.
Yeah, I have.
Sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, it's an interesting, there's a lot of debate in Silicon Valley right now around like the degree to, and how you get more diversity into these things. It reminds me in some ways a bit of, kind of autopilot back in the day, right? If you go from fully manual to full autopilot, but you still have a pilot in there and you're expecting the pilot to intervene. But he's removed, or she is removed from the whole bit of flying, and so they're much less able to intervene because they haven't sort of been following when something goes wrong, and that's when it's most important that they do. So I do think, as you were saying, there will be at least a period of sort of hybrid, machine and tools but still with human oversight and checking, and I think it's really important that we get that diversity into those early experiments at an early age and understand what we don't know, right? I think it's important not to think that technology is going to magically solve all kinds of problems such as the ones that you've brought up.
Yeah, on that point real quick, one of our partners is the University of Mississippi Medical Center out of Jackson, which they have the sickest patient population within the United States, the highest diabetes, highest obesity, really low mobility, rural population. The majority of their patient visits are through emergency rooms, so they have a lot of these problems with access. And they partner with us for kind of access to Silicon Valley companies and the entrepreneurs. But what I've seen a lot too is the benefit of them coming in and meeting with some of these early stage health companies where They're like, our patients aren't even thinking at this level. They can't follow this nutrition plan. They are in a food desert. Their closest source of food is a gas station, where, you know, some of these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs that are developing these apps, they're not even thinking on that level. And if they come in and pitch to Stanford, that's fine, maybe. Kaiser, you know, we're living in a population that has access to food, where a lot of this population's like, it's not even a point of choice sometimes. You have to think beyond that. So it really helps to put in that perspective from University of Mississippi, OSF Healthcare, these rural populations with less access than what some of these young shots are used to. So that really helps. I think it's just as helpful to get their perspective and background.
Well, and I think back to kind of what can be done or what's being done, that's where a lot of the impact investing world is coming into play, where they're trying to look at, you know, some of these solutions as well.
Andy or Neeta, anything to add before I'm getting the eye from management. We have to close on I know you guys may have some more questions, certainly can approach the panel, but any other parting words before we don't have to? So if you guys can join me thanking our awesome panel, appreciate it. And